In a world where money can buy almost anything, where private jets replace public transport and penthouse suites replace humble homes, one man discovered that the most valuable currency isn't found in any bank vault. It's something so simple, so basic to human nature, that we often forget its power until it's gone. This is the true story of Marcus Wellington, a billionaire whose empire stretched across continents, whose name appeared on Forbes lists and financial headlines. A man who could purchase islands, influence governments, and change industries with a single phone call. Yet on one rainy Tuesday evening in downtown Seattle, he learned something that no amount of wealth could teach him. It started with 5 simple words from a stranger sitting on a park bench, shivering in the cold. "I think you need a hug. May I hug you?" What happened next would not only change the course of 2 lives forever, but would ripple outward, touching hundreds of thousands of people around the world. This is not a fairy tale. This is not fiction. This is the documented account of how one moment of human connection sparked a revolution of kindness that nobody saw coming. The security cameras captured it. The witnesses remembered it. The media reported it. And the world watched as a simple hug became the catalyst for something extraordinary. Sometimes the most powerful stories begin with the smallest gestures. Sometimes the richest man in the room is actually the poorest in spirit. And sometimes, when we least expect it, a stranger's compassion can unlock doors we didn't even know were closed. This is that story. Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 42nd floor office, watching the city of Seattle spread out below him like a miniature model. At 53 years old, he had built an empire that most people could only dream of. His technology company, Wellington Innovations, had revolutionized how people communicated across the globe. His personal wealth exceeded $12 billion, making him one of the richest individuals in the Pacific Northwest. Yet as he stared down at the tiny figures of people moving along the sidewalks, Marcus felt something he rarely acknowledged: emptiness. The irony wasn't lost on him that a man who had connected millions of people through his technology platforms felt more disconnected than ever from his own humanity. The day had been typical for Marcus. He woke at 5:30 a.m. in his sprawling Medina mansion, the same house where he had lived alone for the past 8 years since his divorce. His housekeeper, Maria, had prepared his usual breakfast: steel-cut oats with blueberries, black coffee, and a side of financial reports that his assistant had organized the night before. He ate in silence while scanning through stock prices, merger opportunities, and quarterly projections. By 6:45 a.m., his driver had picked him up in the black Tesla Model S that Marcus preferred for its silence and efficiency. During the 30-minute drive to downtown Seattle, he made 3 international calls, approved 2 major acquisitions, and reviewed a presentation for the board meeting that afternoon. The world moved around him, but he remained isolated in his bubble of wealth and responsibility. The board meeting had been particularly brutal. For 4 hours, Marcus had listened to presentations about declining user engagement, increased competition from overseas companies, and the need for major strategic shifts. His company was still profitable, still growing, but the passionate fire that had once driven him to work 18-hour days had dimmed to barely glowing embers. After the meeting, his assistant Catherine approached him with a concerned expression. She had worked for Marcus for 12 years and had watched him gradually retreat from the world. "Mr. Wellington," she said carefully, "you have 3 dinner invitations for this week: the Thompson Charity Gala, the Tech Industry Awards Ceremony, and the Mayor's fundraiser. Should I confirm your attendance?" Marcus looked at her without really seeing her. These events were all the same to him now. Rooms full of people who wanted something from him: money, connections, influence, or simply the prestige of being seen with him. He would make his appearance, write checks to the appropriate causes, exchange pleasantries with other wealthy individuals, and return home feeling more isolated than before. "Cancel them all," he said quietly. "I need some air." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. In all her years working for Marcus, he had never canceled social obligations without rescheduling. "Are you feeling well, sir?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. "I just need to think." At 7:30 p.m., instead of attending the Thompson Charity Gala where he was expected to donate $50,000 to children's education programs, Marcus found himself walking through downtown Seattle. He had dismissed his driver and left his phone in the office, something he hadn't done in years. The October rain fell steadily, soaking through his expensive wool coat. But he didn't care. He walked without destination, past the bustling restaurants where couples shared intimate dinners, past the coffee shops where friends gathered to catch up on life, past the street musicians who played for coins and smiles. Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he had walked anywhere without a specific purpose, without a schedule to keep or a meeting to attend. The rain grew heavier as he turned into Occidental Park, a small green space in the Pioneer Square neighborhood. The park was mostly empty due to the weather, except for a few hardy souls seeking shelter under the large trees. Marcus found himself drawn to an old wooden bench beneath a massive oak tree, its branches providing minimal protection from the rain. As he sat down heavily on the bench, Marcus noticed he wasn't alone. At the other end of the bench sat a young woman, maybe 25 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair that was damp from the rain. She wore a faded denim jacket over a simple sweater, and her jeans had small holes at the knees. A worn backpack sat at her feet, stuffed with what appeared to be all her possessions. The woman was crying softly, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. She held a crumpled piece of paper in her hands, reading and rereading whatever was written on it. Marcus recognized the look of someone who had received devastating news. For several minutes, they sat in silence while the rain continued to fall around them. Marcus found himself studying this stranger who seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. In his business dealings, he had learned to read people quickly, to assess their motivations and weaknesses. But, looking at this young woman, he saw something different: genuine pain, vulnerability, and a kind of authenticity that he had forgotten existed. The woman finally looked up from her paper and noticed Marcus sitting nearby. Her eyes were red from crying, but they held a depth of compassion that surprised him. She wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve and offered him a small, sad smile. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Marcus was startled by the direct question. In his world, people approached him with careful calculation, always aware of his status and wealth. This woman clearly had no idea who he was. To her, he was just another person seeking shelter from the rain. "You could say that," Marcus replied, surprised by his own honesty. The woman nodded as if she understood perfectly. "I'm Sarah," she said simply. "Marcus," he replied, leaving off his last name for the first time in years. They sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, two strangers sharing a bench and a moment of solitude. Marcus found himself curious about Sarah's story, about what could bring someone to tears in a public park during a rainstorm. "Bad news?" he asked, gesturing toward the paper in her hands. Sarah looked down at the letter and laughed bitterly. "Eviction notice," she said. "I've got 3 days to find a new place to live, and I've got exactly $47 to my name." She shook her head. "I work 2 jobs, but it's still not enough. The rent keeps going up, but my paychecks stay the same." Marcus felt a strange twist in his chest. $47. He spent more than that on a single cup of coffee at some of the exclusive establishments he frequented. Yet here was someone facing homelessness, sitting in the rain with nothing but a backpack and crushing worry. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Sarah shrugged. "Not your fault. I'll figure something out. I always do." She looked at him more closely. "You look like you're carrying some heavy stuff too. Want to talk about it?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. When was the last time someone had asked him how he was feeling? When had anyone shown genuine interest in his emotional state rather than his financial decisions or business strategies? "I don't know," Marcus said slowly. "I think I've forgotten how to talk about anything real." Sarah studied his face with surprising intensity. Despite her own troubles, despite the fact that she was about to lose her home, she seemed genuinely concerned about this stranger she had just met. "You know what I think?" she said softly. "I think you're one of those people who takes care of everyone else, but forgets to take care of yourself. I think you make decisions all day that affect other people's lives, and you carry that responsibility like a weight on your shoulders. And I think you're probably really lonely." Marcus felt something break loose inside his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. How had this woman, this stranger with nothing, seen through his carefully constructed exterior so easily? "I think," Sarah continued, "you need a hug." And not one of those fake business hugs or polite social hugs. I think you need a real hug from someone who doesn't want anything from you except to make you feel a little less alone in the world. She paused, looking directly into his eyes. May I hug you? Marcus stared at her in complete shock. In his 53 years of life, no one had ever made such an offer. No one had ever looked at him and seen his need for simple human comfort. His throat felt tight, and he realized with embarrassment that tears were forming in his eyes. He nodded, unable to speak. Sarah scooted closer on the bench and gently wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a quick, polite embrace. It was a full, genuine hug that seemed to acknowledge every lonely moment, every isolated decision, every night he had gone to bed surrounded by luxury, but feeling completely empty inside. Marcus found himself hugging her back, and for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to feel vulnerable. The hug lasted nearly a minute, and when Sarah finally pulled away, Marcus realized he was crying openly. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Sarah smiled, and despite her own troubles, despite her own tears from moments before, her face was filled with warmth. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that we're not alone, she said. They sat together on that bench for another hour, talking about life, dreams, fears, and hopes. Sarah told him about her jobs working at a diner during the day and cleaning office buildings at night. She told him about her dream of going back to school to become a nurse, a dream that seemed increasingly impossible as she struggled just to survive. Marcus found himself talking about things he had never shared with anyone. His loneliness, his fear that he had built a successful business at the cost of his humanity, his worry that he had forgotten how to connect with people on a genuine level. As the rain finally began to slow, Sarah gathered her backpack and prepared to leave. She had to find somewhere to sleep for the night, somewhere dry and safe. Wait, Marcus said suddenly. The money. For your rent. Let me help. Sarah shook her head immediately. That's not why I told you about it. I didn't hug you to get something from you. I hugged you because you looked like you needed it. I know, Marcus said. But I want to help. Please, let me give you something. I don't take charity, Sarah said firmly. But if you really want to help, maybe you could give me a job recommendation or help me find something better than cleaning offices all night. Marcus stared at her. Here was someone facing homelessness who refused his money but asked only for an opportunity to work. The contrast to his usual experience with people was staggering. What's your last name? He asked. Chun, she replied. Sarah Chun. What? Sarah Chun. Marcus repeated, committing it to memory. I think I might be able to help you with that job situation. They exchanged phone numbers, and Sarah headed off into the night, still carrying her backpack and her eviction notice, but walking with a little more hope than she had an hour earlier. Marcus sat alone on the bench for a long time after she left, processing what had just happened. A stranger had offered him comfort without expecting anything in return. A woman with almost nothing had shown him more genuine kindness in one evening than he had experienced in years of social and business interactions. For the first time in decades, Marcus Wellington felt something. Marcus Wellington arrived at his Medina mansion at nearly midnight, his expensive wool coat still damp from the rain, and his mind spinning with thoughts he couldn't organize. Maria, his housekeeper, had left a note saying his dinner was in the refrigerator, but Marcus had no appetite. Instead, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and stood in his living room, staring out at Lake Washington through the massive windows. The house felt different somehow. The silence that had once seemed peaceful now felt oppressive. The perfectly arranged furniture, the museum-quality art pieces, the awards and accolades displayed on custom shelves, all of it seemed hollow and meaningless compared to the genuine human connection he had experienced on a park bench just hours earlier. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the number Sarah had given him. It was written on a torn piece of paper from her notebook, the ink slightly smudged from the rain. 425-555-0847. He had memorized it already, though he wasn't sure when or how he would use it. Sleep eluded him that night. Marcus found himself lying awake, replaying every moment of his conversation with Sarah. Her honesty about her situation, her refusal to accept charity, her genuine concern for his emotional well-being despite facing homelessness herself. It challenged everything he thought he understood about human nature. In his business world, everyone wanted something. Every conversation was a transaction, every relationship a strategic alliance. Yet Sarah had offered him comfort and asked for nothing in return except the chance to work for what she needed. It was a perspective so foreign to his experience that it kept him awake until dawn. At 6 a.m., Marcus abandoned any hope of sleep and called his assistant Catherine. "Mr. Wellington?" Catherine's voice was concerned. "Is everything all right? It's very early, even for you. I need you to research someone for me," Marcus said without preamble. Sarah Chun, probably mid-20s, works at a diner during the day and cleans office buildings at night. I need to know everything about her employment history, her background, and her current situation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, is this related to a potential business investment or acquisition?" "No," Marcus said. "It's personal." Another pause. In 12 years, Catherine had never received a request to investigate someone for personal reasons. Marcus kept his private life completely separate from his business affairs. "Of course, Mr. Wellington. I'll have a full report for you by this afternoon." "And, Catherine," Marcus added, "I need this kept completely confidential. No one else in the company should know about this research." "Understood, sir." Marcus spent the morning in his home office, but for the first time in years, he found it impossible to concentrate on quarterly reports and strategic planning documents. His mind kept drifting back to Sarah's words. "I think you're probably really lonely." The accuracy of her observation was unsettling. At 2 p.m., Catherine called with her report. Sarah Chun, age 26, originally from Spokane, Washington, she began. She's been in Seattle for 4 years. Currently employed at Murphy's Diner on Capitol Hill, where she works the morning shift 6 days a week. Also employed by Clean Sweep Commercial Services, working night shifts cleaning office buildings in the downtown area. Catherine's voice took on a more serious tone. "Mr. Wellington, her financial situation is quite precarious. She's been consistently employed, but her combined income from both jobs is barely above poverty level. Her rent increased by 30% when her building was sold to new management 6 months ago. She has no family support system. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 18, and she has no siblings. She put herself through community college with a degree in pre-nursing, but had to leave university due to financial constraints." Marcus felt that familiar tightening in his chest. "What about the eviction notice?" "It appears to be legitimate. She's 3 months behind on rent, despite working nearly 70 hours per week. The new building management company has been aggressively evicting long-term tenants to renovate and increase rents." "What's the name of the management company?" Marcus asked. "Pinnacle Property Group. They've been buying up affordable housing throughout Seattle and converting units to luxury rentals." Marcus knew Pinnacle Property Group. He had considered investing in their expansion plans just last year. The irony made him feel slightly sick. "Is there anything else, sir?" Catherine asked. "Yes," Marcus said. "I need you to contact the admissions office at the University of Washington's nursing program. I want to know what it would take for someone with Sarah Chen's background to complete their degree." "Should I mention your name or the company's interest?" "Absolutely not. Make the inquiry anonymously." After ending the call, Marcus sat in his office for a long time, processing what he had learned. Sarah Chun was exactly what she had appeared to be, a hard-working young woman struggling to survive in an increasingly expensive city, with dreams of helping others through a career in nursing. He thought about the contrast between her life and his own. While he worried about stock prices and market share, she worried about having a roof over her head. While he ate dinner alone in a mansion, she worked night shifts cleaning the offices of people who made more in a day than she made in a month. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He dismissed his driver and took his personal car to Capitol Hill, parking outside Murphy's Diner. Through the window, he could see Sarah taking orders and serving customers, moving efficiently between tables with a friendly smile despite everything she was dealing with. Marcus sat in his car for 30 minutes, watching her work. She was good at her job, patient with difficult customers, quick to help her co-workers when they fell behind. Even facing homelessness, she maintained a positive attitude and treated everyone with kindness. Finally, Marcus walked into the diner. Sarah looked up from wiping down a table, and Her face showed genuine surprise and pleasure when she recognized him. "Marcus," she said, then caught herself and lowered her voice. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Are you hungry?" "Actually," Marcus said, "I was wondering if you had time to talk when your shift ends. I have a proposition for you." Sarah's expression became cautious. "What kind of proposition?" "The job kind," Marcus said quickly. "The legitimate, professional opportunity kind." Sarah's face relaxed into a smile. "I get off at 9 p.m. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down that stays open late. Meet me there." "I'll be there," Marcus promised. At exactly 9:15 p.m., Sarah arrived at the coffee shop, having changed out of her work uniform into jeans and a sweater. Marcus had already ordered them both coffee and found a quiet table in the back corner. "So," Sarah said, settling into her chair, "what's this job opportunity?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had spent hours figuring out how to approach this conversation without revealing his true identity or making Sarah feel like charity case. "I work for a large company here in Seattle," he began carefully. "We're always looking for good people, especially people with strong work ethics and genuine character. After talking with you yesterday, I think you might be a good fit for our organization." Sarah leaned forward with interest. "What kind of work?" "Administrative support, customer service, project coordination. The kind of job that would pay well enough for you to go back to school part-time while still supporting yourself." "That sounds almost too good to be true," Sarah said skeptically. "What's the catch?" Marcus smiled at her directness. "No catch. Good employees are hard to find. Most people want everything handed to them without earning it. You're not like that. How do you know what I'm like?" "We talked for one evening." "Sometimes one evening is enough," Marcus said. "You offered kindness to a stranger without expecting anything in return. You work 2 jobs to support yourself instead of looking for handouts. You have goals and dreams that extend beyond your own needs. Those are rare qualities." Sarah studied his face carefully. "What company do you work for?" Marcus had prepared for this question. "A technology firm. We develop communication platforms and software solutions." It wasn't technically a lie, though it was far from the complete truth. "And you think I'm qualified for this job, even though I don't have any experience in technology?" "Experience can be taught," Marcus said. "Character cannot. Besides, we'd start you in a support role where your people skills would be more important than technical knowledge." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking it through. "What about my current jobs? I can't just quit without notice. The people at Murphy's depend on me, and I won't leave them in a difficult position." Once again, Sarah's response impressed Marcus. Even facing homelessness, her first concern was how her leaving might affect her co-workers. "We could arrange for you to give proper notice at both jobs," Marcus said. "The position I'm thinking of could start in 2 weeks." "And the pay?" Marcus had researched comparable positions extensively. Starting salary would be $60,000 per year, with full benefits including health insurance and tuition assistance for employees pursuing continuing education. Sarah's eyes widened. $60,000? That's more than I make at both my jobs combined. "It's a fair wage for the work involved," Marcus said simply. "I don't understand," Sarah said slowly. "You don't even know my last name. You haven't seen my resume or checked my references. How can you offer me a job based on one conversation?" Marcus looked into her eyes and decided to take a risk with a partial truth. "Because yesterday in that park, you showed me something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine human kindness with no ulterior motive. In my experience, that's worth more than any resume." Sarah was quiet for a long time, stirring her coffee and looking out the window at the rain that had started again. "There's something you're not telling me," she said finally. "This is all too convenient, too perfectly timed. Yesterday, I'm facing eviction, and today a stranger offers me a job that would solve all my problems." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Sarah's intuition was sharp, and he hadn't anticipated being questioned so directly about the timing. "You're right," he said carefully. "There is more to the story. But, I promise you, this job offer is legitimate, and it's based on merit, not charity." "Then, tell me the rest of the story." Marcus took a deep breath. "I work for Wellington Innovations. Actually, I own Wellington Innovations." Sarah's face went completely blank. She set down her coffee cup and stared at him. "Wellington Innovations," she repeated slowly. "The technology company worth billions of dollars. The Wellington Innovations." "Yes." And you're Marcus Wellington. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been betrayal. You're a billionaire, she said flatly. That's not how I think of myself, Marcus said quickly. Yesterday in the park, you didn't see a billionaire. You saw someone who was lonely and needed kindness. That person is still who I am. But you lied to me. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you the complete truth. And I didn't tell you because of exactly this reaction. Because now you're looking at me differently. Sarah stood up abruptly. Of course I'm looking at you differently. Do you have any idea what it's like to worry about where you're going to sleep tomorrow night? And then find out you were talking to someone who could buy the entire building you're being evicted from. Several other coffee shop patrons turned to look at them. Sarah noticed and lowered her voice, but her anger was still evident. Is this some kind of game to you? Find the poor person and play savior? No, Marcus said firmly. Sit down, please. Let me explain. Sarah remained standing, her hands clenched into fists. Yesterday was the first time in years that someone has shown me genuine kindness without wanting anything from me, Marcus continued. You hugged me because you thought I needed it, not because you knew I was wealthy. You talked to me like I was a human being, not a bank account. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? Your world. Sarah's voice was bitter. Your world of private jets and mansions and more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. My world of isolation, Marcus said quietly. My world where every conversation is a transaction, where every relationship is strategic, where I go to bed every night in a house worth millions of dollars feeling completely alone. Something in his tone made Sarah pause. She sat back down, but her posture remained defensive. The job offer is real, Marcus continued. And it's not charity. I need good people working for my company. And after one conversation with you, I could see that you have qualities that can't be taught or bought. But you researched me. Yes, I did. I needed to make sure my instincts were correct. Everything I learned confirmed what I already knew. You're exactly the kind of person I want working for Wellington Innovations. Sarah looked out the window again, processing everything she had learned. Why didn't you just write me a check yesterday? You could have paid my rent, paid for my school, given me enough money to never worry about anything again. Because, Marcus said, you told me you don't take charity. And because giving you money wouldn't have been helping you. It would have been helping me feel better about myself. You said you wanted a job opportunity. I'm giving you one. A job that conveniently pays exactly what I need to get back on my feet. A job that pays market rate for the position. I checked. They sat in silence for several minutes, the tension between them palpable. If I take this job, Sarah said finally, I need you to understand something. I won't be your project. I won't be your way of feeling better about your wealth. I'll work hard. I'll earn my salary. And I'll treat you like any other employer. That's exactly what I want, Marcus said. And I need to know that if this job doesn't work out, if I can't meet your expectations, you'll fire me just like you would anyone else. Agreed. And I need to know that this isn't you trying to buy my friendship. Marcus met her eyes directly. Sarah, yesterday you gave me something that money can't buy. Your friendship isn't for sale because it was already freely given. For the first time since learning his identity, Sarah's expression softened slightly. This is all really overwhelming, she admitted. I know, and I'm sorry for not being completely honest from the beginning. But I hope you'll consider the job offer on its merits. Sarah was quiet for a long time, clearly weighing her options. I'll need to think about it, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. But, Marcus, she said, standing up to leave. If I do this, it has to be because I earned it. Not because you feel sorry for me. You already earned it, Marcus said. Yesterday, when you saw someone in pain and offered comfort without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of person I want representing my company. As Sarah left the coffee shop, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts. He had revealed his identity and made his offer. Now he could only wait to see if the first genuine friendship he had experienced in decades would survive the weight of his wealth. Sarah Chen's first day at Wellington Innovations began at 8:30 a.m. on a crisp Monday morning in early November. She stood outside the gleaming 42-story glass tower in downtown Seattle, wearing a navy blazer she had bought from a thrift store and carefully tailored herself, paired with her best pair of black pants and the only professional shoes she owned. The building's lobby was impressive beyond anything Sarah had ever experienced. Marble floors reflected the morning light streaming through massive windows, and a waterfall wall created a soothing backdrop for the modern furniture and abstract art displays. Security guards in crisp uniforms directed employees and visitors with polished professionalism. Sarah approached the reception desk, where a friendly woman in her 30s greeted her with a warm smile. "You must be Sarah Chun," the receptionist said. "I'm Jennifer. Mr. Wellington asked me to personally escort you up on your first day. How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Sarah admitted honestly. "This is quite a change from my last job." Jennifer laughed. "I remember my first day here 5 years ago. I felt like I was walking into a movie set. But you'll find that once you get past the fancy building, the people here are really wonderful to work with." The elevator ride to the 35th floor gave Sarah a stunning view of Seattle as they ascended. She could see Puget Sound in the distance, with ferries moving like toys across the water, and Mount Rainier rising majestically on the horizon. "Here we are," Jennifer said as the elevator doors opened. "Floor 35 houses our customer relations and project coordination departments. Your supervisor is Linda Martinez, and she's been excited to meet you." The office space was open and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing natural light to every workspace. Employees moved purposefully between desks and conference rooms, but Sarah noticed something unexpected. People were actually talking to each other, laughing occasionally, and seemed genuinely engaged with their work. Linda Martinez turned out to be a woman in her 40s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. She had the look of someone who had earned her position through hard work and competence rather than politics or connections. "Sarah, welcome to the team," Linda said, shaking her hand firmly. "I've been looking forward to working with you. From what I've heard about your background, I think you'll bring exactly the kind of perspective we need in customer relations." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "I'm eager to learn and contribute however I can." Linda showed Sarah to her workstation, a modern desk near a window with a new computer, ergonomic chair, and all the supplies she would need. It was the first workspace that had ever truly belonged to her, and Sarah felt a surge of pride and determination. "Your role will involve coordinating between our development teams and our clients," Linda explained. "You'll be helping to ensure that customer needs are understood and met throughout the product development process. It requires someone who can listen carefully, communicate clearly, and think creatively about problem solving." Over the next several hours, Linda introduced Sarah to her new colleagues and began training her on the company's systems and processes. Sarah met David, a software engineer who had been with the company for 3 years, Michelle, a project manager with an infectious enthusiasm for her work, and Robert, a customer service specialist who had started an entry-level position and worked his way up to team leader. What struck Sarah most was how differently people interacted here compared to her previous jobs. At the diner, everyone was friendly but constantly stressed about serving customers quickly and efficiently. At the cleaning company, workers rarely spoke to each other during their shifts. But here at Wellington Innovations, Sarah observed colleagues collaborating genuinely, sharing ideas freely, and treating each other with respect regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. During her lunch break, Sarah found herself in the company cafeteria, which was more like a high-end restaurant than any workplace dining facility she had ever seen. The food was fresh, diverse, and amazingly affordable for employees. As she sat alone at a small table, still feeling somewhat overwhelmed by her new environment, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah looked up to see Marcus Wellington approaching with his own lunch tray. She was surprised to see that he had chosen the same simple sandwich and soup combination that she had selected. "Of course," she said, though she felt suddenly self-conscious about being seen having lunch with the CEO. "How's your first day going?" Marcus asked as he sat down across from her. "It's overwhelming but exciting," Sarah admitted. "Everyone has been incredibly welcoming. Linda is an excellent supervisor, and my teammates seem genuinely happy to have me here." "I'm glad to hear that. Linda is one of our best managers. She has a talent for bringing out the best in people." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the bustling activity of the cafeteria around them. Sarah noticed that several employees nodded respectfully to Marcus as they passed, but no one seemed intimidated or overly deferential. The atmosphere was professional but relaxed. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said suddenly. "Of course. Why is everyone here so normal? I mean, this is a huge company with thousands of employees, but people seem to actually enjoy working here. That's not typical, is it?" Marcus smiled. "You're very observant. It wasn't always like this. When I first built this company, I was focused entirely on profits and efficiency. The work environment was competitive and often harsh. People were productive, but they weren't particularly happy." "What changed?" Marcus paused, considering how to answer. "I realized that treating employees well isn't just the right thing to do. It's also good business. Happy employees are more creative, more loyal, and more productive. They provide better customer service and come up with better solutions to problems." "When did you realize this?" "About 5 years ago," Marcus said. "I started paying attention to how people interacted with each other, how they felt about their work, how they talked about the company when they thought I wasn't listening. I didn't like what I discovered." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "So you changed the entire corporate culture?" "We changed it together. I couldn't do it alone. It required buy-in from managers like Linda, from team leaders like Robert, from every person who decided to embrace a different way of working. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was. Some people left because they preferred the old competitive atmosphere. Others flourished once they felt valued and respected. We had to rebuild trust that had been damaged over years of prioritizing profits over people." Sarah studied Marcus's face as he spoke. Despite his wealth and power, she could see genuine humility in his expression when he talked about the mistakes he had made. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because yesterday you asked me what it was like to carry responsibility for other people's lives. I want you to understand that I take that responsibility seriously now in a way that I didn't before." Their conversation was interrupted when Linda approached their table. "Sarah, I hate to interrupt your lunch, but we just received an urgent call from one of our major clients. There's been a miscommunication about their project timeline, and they're quite upset. I was wondering if you might be interested in sitting in on the call this afternoon. It would be a good learning experience." Sarah looked at Marcus, then back at Linda. "I'm probably not qualified to contribute much on my first day." "Actually," Marcus interjected, "I think Sarah might bring exactly the right perspective to this situation. Sometimes fresh eyes see solutions that the rest of us miss. Would you be comfortable with that?" Linda asked Sarah. "Yes," Sarah said, though she felt her heart rate increase. "I'd like to try." The client call that afternoon involved a software development project that was running behind schedule due to changing requirements and unclear communication between the client and the development team. Sarah sat quietly in the conference room for the first 15 minutes, listening as Linda, David, and 2 other team members tried to address the client's concerns. The client, a retail company executive named James Morrison, was clearly frustrated and spoke increasingly loudly as the call progressed. "We've been working with Wellington Innovations for 6 months, Morrison said, his voice crackling through the speakerphone. "We were promised a delivery date of December 1st, and now you're telling us it won't be ready until February? This is completely unacceptable." David began explaining the technical challenges that had caused the delays, but Morrison interrupted him. "I don't want to hear about your technical problems. I need solutions. We've already promised our customers that this new system will be available for the holiday shopping season." Sarah watched the team members exchange frustrated glances. They had clearly had similar conversations with this client before, and the situation seemed to be escalating rather than improving. Finally, Sarah raised her hand slightly to catch Linda's attention. Linda nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah said, speaking into the conference phone. "My name is Sarah Chun, and I'm new to the Wellington team. I've been listening to your concerns, and I think I understand how frustrating this situation must be for you." The line was quiet for a moment. "I used to work in customer service," Sarah continued, "and I learned that when things go wrong, customers usually care less about why something happened and more about what we're going to do to fix it. Is that accurate in this case?" "Yes," Morrison said, his tone somewhat less aggressive. "Exactly. So what if we focused on finding a solution that meets your immediate needs, even if it's not exactly what was originally planned? Can you tell me what specific features your customers are expecting for the holiday season? For the next 30 minutes, Sarah guided the conversation toward practical solutions rather than technical explanations. She asked clarifying questions, summarized key points, and helped identify which features were absolutely critical for the December timeline versus which could be implemented in a later phase. By the end of the call, Morrison's tone had completely changed. Ms. Chun, I appreciate your approach to this problem. You've helped us identify a path forward that I think will work for everyone. Linda, I hope we'll be working with Sarah on future communications. After the call ended, the conference room was quiet for a moment. That was extraordinary, David said. We've been struggling with that client for weeks. Sarah, where did you learn to handle difficult situations like that? Linda asked. Murphy's Diner, Sarah replied with a smile. You'd be amazed how many upset customers you can deal with when someone's breakfast order gets messed up. The principles are the same. Listen to what they're really saying, acknowledge their frustration, and focus on finding solutions. Word of Sarah's success with the Morrison client spread quickly through the office. Over the next few weeks, she found herself included in more client calls and project meetings, not because of any connection to Marcus, but because her colleagues had observed her natural ability to communicate effectively and solve problems creatively. Sarah also began to notice things about Wellington innovations that others took for granted. During a team meeting in late November, she made a suggestion that surprised everyone. I've been thinking, she said during a discussion about improving customer satisfaction scores. What if we created a program where employees volunteer to work directly with clients who are facing financial difficulties? Not as a charity program, but as a way to help them use our products more effectively so they can grow their own businesses. The room was quiet as people considered this idea. What exactly are you thinking? Linda asked. Well, I noticed that some of our smaller clients struggle not because our products don't work, but because they don't have the resources to implement them effectively. What if we offered pro bono consulting hours to help them succeed? It would be good for them, good for our reputation, and it would give our employees a chance to make a direct impact on people's lives. Michelle, the project manager, leaned forward with interest. That's actually a brilliant idea. We could probably help dozens of small businesses become more successful, which would eventually lead to them becoming bigger clients. And our employees would feel more connected to the purpose of their work, Robert added. Linda nodded slowly. Sarah, would you be interested in developing a proposal for this program? I'd love to, Sarah replied. That evening, as Sarah worked late in the office developing her volunteer consulting proposal, Marcus stopped by her desk. Burning the midnight oil, he asked. I'm working on something that I think could really make a difference, Sarah said, looking up from her computer screen. Linda asked me to develop a proposal for a volunteer program. Tell me about it. Sarah explained her idea, her enthusiasm growing as she described how Wellington Innovations employees could use their skills to help struggling small businesses succeed. Marcus listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions. As they talked, Sarah realized that this was exactly the kind of conversation she had hoped to have when she first imagined working for a company that made a positive impact on the world. This reminds me of something you said to me in the park, Marcus said when she finished explaining her proposal. What's that? You talked about dreams that extend beyond your own needs. This program isn't about benefiting you or even just benefiting Wellington Innovations. It's about creating opportunities for other people to succeed. Sarah felt a flush of pride, but also something deeper, a sense that she was exactly where she belonged. Can I ask you something personal? She said. Of course. Do you ever feel guilty about having so much wealth when other people are struggling? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering her question carefully. Every day, he said finally. For years, I told 3 months into Sarah's tenure at Wellington Innovations, the volunteer consulting program had exceeded everyone's expectations. What began as her simple proposal had grown into a comprehensive initiative involving over 50 employees who donated their time to help struggling small businesses implement technology solutions. The program had been featured in 3 major business publications and had already measurably improved the revenue of 32 client companies. But success, as both Sarah and Marcus were learning, often brought unexpected challenges. The first sign of trouble came during a board meeting in February. Marcus sat at the head of the polished conference table, listening to quarterly reports from his senior executives, when board member Harrison Blackwell raised a concern that had been whispered about in certain circles for weeks. "Marcus, I need to address the elephant in the room," Blackwell said, his tone carefully neutral. "There are questions about your recent hiring practices and the allocation of company resources to social programs." The room fell silent. The other 7 board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none seemed surprised by Blackwell's comment. "What questions?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew where this was heading. "Questions about whether Wellington Innovations is becoming more of a charity organization than a business," Blackwell continued. "Specifically, questions about an employee who was hired under unusual circumstances and who seems to have gained an extraordinary amount of influence in a very short time." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Are you referring to Sarah Chun?" "I'm referring to the fact that you hired someone with no technology experience, no college degree, and no professional references to a position that typically requires years of experience. And now this same employee is directing company resources toward programs that, while admirable, don't directly contribute to shareholder value." Board member Patricia Wilson, who had served as Marcus's mentor when he was starting the company, leaned forward with a concerned expression. "Marcus, we're not questioning your right to make hiring decisions. But several major investors have expressed concerns about the company's direction. They're worried that you're prioritizing social impact over profitability." "Our profits have increased by 12% this quarter," Marcus replied evenly. "Yes, but our expenses have also increased significantly due to these volunteer programs," said board member Thomas Chun, no relation to Sarah. "We're essentially paying employees to work for other companies instead of focusing on our own clients." Marcus looked around the table at the faces of people who had supported him for years, people whose expertise and guidance had helped build Wellington Innovations into one of the most successful companies in the Pacific Northwest. He realized that for the first time since founding the company, he was facing serious opposition from his own board. "Let me ask you something," Marcus said carefully. 3 months ago, our employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time low. Our customer retention rates were declining, and we were losing talented people to competitors. Today, our employee satisfaction scores have improved by 30%. Our customer retention is the highest it's been in 5 years, and our recruitment efforts are attracting better candidates than ever before. Do you think there might be a connection between our social impact programs and our improved business metrics?" Blackwell shook his head. "Correlation doesn't prove causation, Marcus. And even if these programs are having a positive effect, that doesn't justify the risk they represent to the company's reputation." "What risk?" Marcus asked. "The risk that investors and clients will start to see Wellington Innovations as unfocused and driven by personal relationships rather than business strategy. The risk that your friendship with Ms. Chun is influencing major business decisions." Marcus felt a flash of anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Sarah Chun is one of the most valuable employees this company has ever had. Her contributions have been recognized by her supervisor, her colleagues, and our clients. The Morrison account specifically requested that she be their primary liaison because of her effectiveness. No one is questioning Ms. Chin's performance," Wilson said diplomatically. "But Harrison raises valid concerns about perception. The business world is watching Wellington Innovations closely, and any appearance of favoritism or poor judgment could damage our credibility." The meeting continued for another hour, with Marcus defending both Sarah's contributions and the volunteer program while the board pressed their concerns about the company's changing priorities. By the time the meeting ended, Marcus realized that he faced a choice. He could scale back the social impact programs and distance himself from Sarah to satisfy the board's concerns, or he could continue on his current path and risk a potential confrontation with his investors and advisors. That evening, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in months. He went for a walk through downtown Seattle, trying to process the day's events. Without consciously planning it, his steps led him back to Occidental Park, to the same bench where he and Sarah had first met. The park was different now, bustling with activity despite the cold February evening. A new coffee cart had been set up near the entrance, staffed by a young man who called out friendly greetings to regular customers. Several of the old benches had been replaced, and New lighting made the space feel safer and more welcoming. Marcus sat on the bench and pulled out his phone, scrolling through the messages that had accumulated during the board meeting. 3 were from business reporters asking for comments about rumors of internal disagreement at Wellington Innovations. 2 were from major investors requesting private meetings to discuss the company's strategic direction. 1 was from Sarah, asking if he wanted to grab dinner to discuss a new idea she had for expanding the volunteer program. As he was reading Sarah's message, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Fancy meeting you here." Marcus turned to see Sarah approaching, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the new cart. "I thought you might be here," she said, settling onto the bench beside him and handing him one of the cups. "You had that look when you left the office today. The same look you had the first time I met you." "What look?" "The look of someone carrying weight that's too heavy for one person to handle alone." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching people move through the park. Marcus noticed that several pedestrians stopped to chat with the coffee cart vendor, creating an impromptu community gathering in a space that had once felt isolated and unwelcoming. "Difficult board meeting?" Sarah asked eventually. Marcus looked at her with surprise. "How did you know?" "Linda mentioned that some of the senior executives seemed tense this afternoon. And I've been hearing whispers about the volunteer program. Some people think it's taking up too much time and resources." "It's more than that," Marcus said quietly. "Some of the board members think I hired you for the wrong reasons. They're concerned that my personal feelings are affecting my business judgment." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her coffee cup. "Maybe they're right," she said finally. "What?" "Maybe you did hire me for the wrong reasons. Maybe this whole thing is more complicated than either of us wanted to admit." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. "Sarah, you've exceeded every expectation. Your work has been exceptional. But that's not the point, is it? The point is that you offered me a job after one conversation with a stranger in a park. The point is that you're defending programs and policies that you might not have considered if we hadn't become friends. Are you saying I should have left you to face homelessness? Are you saying I shouldn't have listened to your ideas about helping other people? I'm saying that maybe your board members have legitimate concerns about how this all looks from the outside." Marcus turned to face her directly. "Do you regret taking the job?" "No," Sarah said immediately. "Working at Wellington Innovations has changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. I'm using skills I didn't know I had. I'm making a difference in people's lives, and I'm finally able to think about long-term goals instead of just surviving day to day." "Then, what are you saying?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm saying that maybe we need to be more careful about how our friendship affects business decisions. And maybe we need to make sure that the volunteer program can succeed based on its merits, not just because you support it." Over the next hour, they talked honestly about the challenges they were facing. Sarah admitted that she had heard some colleagues speculating about the nature of her relationship with Marcus, wondering whether her rapid advancement was due to favoritism rather than performance. Marcus acknowledged that his judgment might be influenced by his desire to support Sarah's ideas and by his gratitude for the friendship she had offered him. "What if I transferred to a different department?" Sarah suggested. "Something that would remove any appearance that I'm getting special treatment because we're friends." "That would be giving in to gossip and speculation," Marcus replied. "Your work speaks for itself. But it would also protect the volunteer program. If people see that you're willing to make difficult decisions to avoid any conflict of interest, they might be more supportive of the program's goals." Marcus considered this. The idea of Sarah transferring departments felt like a step backward, but he could see the logic in her reasoning. "There is another option," he said slowly. "What's that?" "What if you weren't an employee at all? What if you started your own consulting company, specializing in helping businesses develop social impact programs? Wellington Innovations could be your first client, but you'd also be free to work with other companies." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "You'd want me to leave Wellington Innovations?" "I'd want you to be able to do the work you're passionate about without anyone questioning your motivations or my judgment. And I'd want you to have the independence to build something that's entirely your own." The idea was both exciting and terrifying to Sarah. Starting her own business would give her complete control over her work and eliminate any concerns about favoritism or conflicts of interest. But it would also mean giving up the security and support system she had found at Wellington Innovations. "That's a huge risk," she said. "Yes, it is. But Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards. They discussed the possibility for another hour, exploring how such a transition might work and what kind of support Marcus could provide without creating new conflicts of interest. By the time they parted ways that evening, they had agreed that Sarah would spend the next few weeks researching the feasibility of starting her own consulting practice. 2 weeks later, Sarah submitted her resignation from Wellington Innovations, effective in 30 days. The news sent shockwaves through the company, with many employees expressing surprise and disappointment that such a valuable team member was leaving. But Sarah's resignation letter explained her decision in terms that addressed both the board's concerns and her own desire for independence. I believe that the social impact programs we've developed together can have even greater success if they're supported by an independent consulting firm that can work with multiple companies across various industries. This transition will allow Wellington Innovations to continue benefiting from these programs while avoiding any appearance of conflicts of interest. The board's response was cautiously positive. Blackwell acknowledged that Sarah's decision showed admirable professional judgment, while Wilson praised the innovative approach to addressing social responsibility through business partnerships. Marcus worked closely with his legal team to structure a consulting agreement that would allow Sarah's new firm, Chun Consulting Solutions, to continue managing the volunteer program while also developing similar initiatives for other companies. The arrangement included a 6-month contract with Wellington Innovations worth $180,000. Enough to give Sarah's new business a solid foundation. On Sarah's last day as a Wellington Innovations employee, her colleagues threw an impromptu farewell party in the cafeteria. The gathering included people from every department, many of whom shared stories about how Sarah's approach to problem-solving and customer service had influenced their own work. Linda Martinez gave a short speech that summarized what many people were thinking. In 6 months, Sarah Chin taught all of us that business success and social responsibility aren't competing goals. They're complementary forces that make each other stronger. We're going to miss having her as a colleague, but we're excited to see what she builds as an entrepreneur. As the party wound down, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah in her former office as she packed the last of her personal belongings. "Any regrets?" he asked. "Ask me in 6 months," Sarah replied with a smile. "But right now, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The volunteer program won't be the same without you managing it directly. It'll be better. Now it will succeed because it's a good program, not because people think you're protecting it for personal reasons." Marcus nodded, though he still felt conflicted about the circumstances that had led to Sarah's departure. "Marcus," Sarah said, pausing in her packing, "I need you to know that what happened between us, the friendship, the job opportunity, everything, it was all real. It wasn't charity, and it wasn't favoritism. It was 2 people who saw something valuable in each other and decided to act on that recognition." "I know," Marcus said, "but I also know that your decision to leave takes courage that most people don't have. I learned that courage from you. You took a risk on someone you barely knew because you believed in the possibility of human connection. Now I'm taking a risk on myself because I believe in the possibility of making a difference." 18 months after Sarah Chun left Wellington Innovations to start her consulting firm, she stood before an audience of 300 business leaders at the Pacific Northwest Economic Summit, preparing to deliver the keynote address about sustainable business practices through social impact. The conference hall in downtown Portland was packed beyond capacity, with overflow attendees watching via live stream from adjacent rooms. Sarah's consulting firm, Chun Consulting Solutions, had grown from a 1-person operation to a team of 15 specialists working with companies across 12 states. The volunteer consulting model she had pioneered at Wellington Innovations had been implemented by 47 companies, creating over 1,200 jobs and generating an estimated $23 million in economic impact for small businesses and startups. As Sarah looked out at the audience, she saw faces representing Fortune 500 corporations, innovative startups, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies. In the third row, she spotted Marcus Wellington, who had flown down from Seattle specifically to attend her presentation. He gave her an encouraging nod and a smile that reminded her of their conversation on the park bench that had started this entire journey. 2 years ago, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. I was working 2 minimum-wage jobs and facing eviction from my apartment. I had $47 to my name and no prospects for a better future. Today, I stand before you as the founder of a consulting firm that has helped create over 1,000 jobs and has generated millions of dollars in economic activity. The audience was immediately engaged, leaning forward to hear her story. This transformation didn't happen because of some revolutionary business innovation or breakthrough technology. It happened because of a simple human interaction, a hug between strangers on a rainy evening in a Seattle park. Sarah went on to tell the story of her meeting with Marcus, carefully protecting the personal details of their friendship while highlighting the business lessons that had emerged from their unlikely connection. She talked about the power of genuine human empathy in corporate environments, the measurable benefits of social impact programs, and the unexpected discoveries that could result from looking beyond traditional hiring criteria. What we learned at Wellington Innovations, Sarah continued, is that companies don't succeed because they prioritize profits over people. They succeed because they recognize that profits and people are interconnected. When you create opportunities for employees to make a meaningful difference in other people's lives, those employees become more engaged, more creative, and more committed to the company's success. She presented case studies from her consulting work, a manufacturing company in Portland that had increased employee retention by 40% after implementing a skills-sharing program with local schools, a technology firm in Denver that had improved customer satisfaction scores by 35% after launching a pro bono consulting initiative, a retail chain in San Francisco that had reduced turnover costs by $2.3 million annually after creating a community service program that allowed employees to volunteer during paid work hours. The return on investment for social impact programs typically exceeds 300%, Sarah explained. When you factor in improved employee engagement, enhanced company reputation, increased customer loyalty, and reduced recruitment costs. But the most powerful moment of Sarah's presentation came when she introduced 3 special guests, small business owners whose companies had been transformed through the volunteer consulting programs she had helped develop. Maria Gonzalez, who had started a food truck business with a loan of $15,000, spoke about how volunteer consultants had helped her develop a business plan that led to opening 3 restaurants and employing 22 people. James Kim, who had launched a tutoring service for immigrant children, described how pro bono marketing support had helped him expand his program to serve over 400 students across 5 school districts. Rebecca Johnson, who had created an online platform for selling handmade crafts by disabled artisans, explained how volunteer technology consultants had helped her build a website that now generates over $500,000 in annual revenue for 150 artists. Each of these entrepreneurs received support from employees at companies like yours, Sarah told the audience. Employees who volunteered their professional skills during work hours, with their employer's full support and encouragement. The result isn't just successful businesses, it's stronger communities, more engaged employees, and more profitable companies. The presentation concluded with thunderous applause and a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. During the question and answer session that followed, executives from dozens of companies requested information about implementing similar programs in their own organizations. After the conference, Sarah and Marcus met for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. It was the first time they had been able to have an extended conversation in several months, both having been consumed by the demands of their rapidly evolving careers. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said as they settled into a corner booth with a view of the water. "Watching you speak today, seeing the impact you've had on so many companies and communities, it's extraordinary. I couldn't have done any of this without that first opportunity you gave me," Sarah replied. "Not just the job, but the belief that someone like me could contribute to something bigger than survival. You've more than contributed. You've created a movement." Sarah smiled at that characterization, but she knew there was truth to it. Her consulting firm was receiving inquiries from companies in Europe and Asia who had heard about the American social impact consulting model. Business schools were developing case studies based on her work. 3 major corporations had created full-time positions for social impact coordinators specifically to manage programs inspired by her presentations. "What about you?" Sarah asked. How are things at Wellington Innovations? Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Different than they were 2 years ago. Better, I think. The board is completely supportive of our social programs now that they can see the measurable benefits. We've actually expanded the volunteer consulting initiative and started a scholarship program for employees who want to pursue additional education. And personally, I'm learning that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to create opportunities for other people. I've started a foundation that provides seed funding for social enterprises, businesses that are designed to solve social problems while generating sustainable profits. Sarah raised her eyebrows. That's a big step. It's inspired by something you said during your first week at the company. You asked me if I ever felt guilty about having so much wealth while other people were struggling. I realized that guilt without action is just self-indulgence. Over dinner, they talked about the unexpected ways their lives had unfolded since that evening in the park. Marcus had begun dating someone, a nonprofit director named Catherine, who shared his commitment to using business success for social good. Sarah had been accepted into a part-time MBA program specifically designed for social entrepreneurs, allowing her to build theoretical knowledge around the practical experience she had gained through her consulting work. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus said as they prepared to leave the restaurant. Of course. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't offered me that hug? If we had just sat on that bench in silence and gone our separate ways? Sarah considered the question seriously. I think about that sometimes. I probably would have ended up homeless for a while, then eventually found another minimum wage job. I might have gotten back on my feet eventually, but it would have taken years instead of months. And I probably would have continued isolating myself from genuine human connections, Marcus added. I would have kept building wealth while losing touch with the reasons why wealth matters. But I think the bigger question, Sarah said, is whether other people would have missed the opportunities that came from our connection. Maria wouldn't have been able to expand her restaurant business. James wouldn't have been able to help 400 immigrant students. Rebecca's disabled artisans wouldn't have found a market for their work. The ripple effects, Marcus said. Exactly. Sometimes I think about all the people whose lives are different now because of that one moment of kindness. People we've never met, in places we've never been, who benefited because someone was willing to offer comfort to a stranger. As they walked along the Portland riverfront after dinner, Sarah and Marcus talked about their plans for the future. Sarah's consulting firm was preparing to open offices in Chicago and Atlanta with the goal of reaching companies across the entire country. Marcus's foundation was planning to fund 50 social enterprises over the next 3 years, with a particular focus on businesses started by women, minorities, and people from low-income backgrounds. We're not the same people we were that night in the park, Marcus observed. No, we're not. But I think we're who we were meant to become. 6 months later, on a rainy October evening exactly 2 years after their first meeting, Sarah found herself walking through Occidental Park in Seattle. She had been in the city for a client presentation and had deliberately extended her trip to revisit the place where her life had changed so dramatically. The park was bustling with activity. The coffee cart had been so successful that it had been replaced by a permanent coffee shop. A small amphitheater had been built near the center of the park, where local musicians performed on weekend evenings. New landscaping and improved lighting had transformed the space into a vibrant community gathering place. Sarah sat down on the same bench where she had first encountered Marcus Wellington, though it had since been replaced with a new one bearing a small plaque. In recognition of the generosity of Wellington Innovations employees who volunteer their time to strengthen our community. As she sat there reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, Sarah noticed a young man sitting on a nearby bench. He was probably in his early 20s, wearing worn clothes and holding what appeared to be a rejection letter from a job interview. His shoulders were slumped with disappointment, and he looked as defeated as Sarah had felt 2 years earlier. Sarah watched him for several minutes, remembering her own desperation during those difficult months when she had struggled to make ends meet. Finally, she approached him. "Rough day?" she asked, settling onto the bench beside him. The young man looked up with surprise, then managed a bitter smile. "That obvious, huh? I've been there," Sarah said simply. "What happened?" "Job interview. Thought I had a good chance, but apparently they decided to go with someone with more experience." He gestured toward the letter in his hands. It's the same story everywhere. Need experience to get a job, but need a job to get experience. What kind of work are you looking for? Marketing, communications, something in that field. I just graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in business, but it seems like that's not enough anymore. Sarah nodded sympathetically. What's your name? David. David Park. David, I'm Sarah. And I might know of some opportunities that would be interested in someone with fresh ideas rather than just experience. Over the next hour, Sarah talked with David about his goals, his skills, and his willingness to work hard for the right opportunity. She learned that he had grown up in foster care, had worked multiple part-time jobs to pay for college, and was passionate about using marketing strategies to help small businesses compete with larger corporations. By the time their conversation ended, Sarah had given David her business card and the contact information for 3 companies that were actively seeking entry-level employees with strong work ethics and innovative thinking. Why are you helping me? David asked as they prepared to part ways. Sarah smiled, remembering asking Marcus the same question 2 years earlier. Because someone helped me when I needed it most, she said. And because sometimes the most powerful way to pay forward a kindness is to offer it to someone else. 3 weeks later, David Park started his first job at a marketing firm that specialized in helping nonprofits develop fundraising campaigns. His starting salary was $48,000 per year with full benefits and opportunities for rapid advancement. 6 months after that, David would help create a marketing campaign for a homeless shelter that would increase donations by 200% and enable the organization to expand its services to serve 150 additional people each year. 1 year later, David would start his own consulting firm focused on helping social service organizations develop effective communication strategies. The revolution of kindness that had started with a simple hug between strangers in a Seattle park continued to spread, touching new lives, creating new opportunities, and proving that the most powerful force for positive change in the world isn't money or technology or government programs. It's human beings choosing to see each other as worthy of compassion, support, and genuine connection. On that rainy October evening, as Sarah walked away from Occidental Park for the second time in her life, she realized that the hug she had offered Marcus Wellington 2 years earlier had become something much larger than either of them had imagined. It had become proof that kindness, once set in motion, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The small plaque on the park bench caught the glow of the streetlights as evening settled over Seattle. Below the inscription recognizing Wellington Innovations Community Service, someone had added a handwritten note in small letters, in memory of the power of human connection. The revolution of kindness continued, one conversation, one opportunity, one hug at a time. Sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest gestures. Sometimes the wealthiest person in the room is actually the poorest in spirit until someone reminds them what truly matters. And sometimes, when we least expect it, a stranger's compassion can unlock possibilities that change the world. This is that story. This is proof that it happened. And this is an invitation to believe that it can happen again, whenever someone is brave enough to offer kindness to another human being who needs it. The question isn't whether such moments of connection are possible. The question is whether we're willing to create them. As Sarah left the Wellington Innovations building for the last time as an employee, carrying a small box of belongings and a folder full of business plans for her new company, she realized that the conversation with Marcus in the park 6 months earlier had set in motion changes that were far from over. The hug that had started everything had led to friendship, which had led to opportunity, which had led to professional growth, which was now leading to entrepreneurship and independence. Each step had built upon the previous one, creating a foundation strong enough to support not just Sarah's dreams, but the dreams of dozens of other people whose lives had been touched by the program she had created. The testing of their friendship's foundation had revealed that it was strong enough to withstand scrutiny, flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances, and deep enough to support difficult decisions that prioritized long-term success over short-term comfort. As Marcus watched from his 42nd floor office window, seeing Sarah emerge from the building and walk confidently toward her new future, he realized that letting her go was both the hardest decision he had made in years and the clearest evidence that their friendship was based on genuine respect rather than mutual dependency. The ripple effects of their connection were entering a new phase, one that would soon touch companies and communities far beyond Wellington innovations. Myself that building a successful business and creating jobs was enough. That paying taxes and making charitable donations was sufficient contribution to society. And now I think wealth comes with responsibility. Not just the responsibility to be successful, but the responsibility to use that success to create opportunities for others. Sarah nodded. That's why you hired me, isn't it? Not just because you thought I'd be a good employee, but because you wanted to use your position to give someone a chance they wouldn't have otherwise had. Partly, Marcus admitted. But also because that night in the park, you reminded me that business success means nothing if you lose your humanity in the process. They worked together for another hour, refining Sarah's proposal and discussing implementation strategies. As they prepared to leave the office, Sarah realized that her relationship with Marcus had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. He had become someone who challenged her to think bigger, to consider possibilities she had never imagined, while she helped him remember that true success was measured not in dollars, but in the positive impact on other people's lives. The volunteer consulting program would eventually help over 200 small businesses across the Pacific Northwest. It would become a model that other companies would copy, generating millions of dollars in economic impact for struggling entrepreneurs. But that night, as Sarah and Marcus rode the elevator down from the 35th floor, neither of them was thinking about the program's future success. They were both reflecting on how a simple hug between strangers had led to a friendship that was transforming not just their own lives, but the lives of countless people they would never meet. The ripple effect of their connection was expanding in ways neither of them could have anticipated, touching employees, clients, and communities throughout the region. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of human kindness. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his office to find a handwritten note waiting on his desk. Catherine had placed it there with a knowing smile, the first time he had seen her genuinely pleased about anything in months. The note was from Sarah. Mr. Wellington, I've thought about your job offer all night. I would like to accept, with the conditions we discussed. I believe good people deserve opportunities, and I believe opportunities should be earned. Thank you for seeing something in me that I hope I can live up to. I can start in 2 weeks. Sincerely, Sarah Chun. Marcus read the note 3 times, then walked to his window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Sarah Chun was probably serving coffee and taking breakfast orders, working hard, and treating people with kindness despite everything she had been through. For the first time in years, Marcus Wellington was excited about going to work. Not because of a new acquisition or a breakthrough product, but because he was about to have someone in his company who reminded him why business success meant nothing without human connection. The hug that had started this journey was about to transform not just 2 lives, but the entire culture of one of the world's most successful companies. Erring inside him that he had thought was long dead, the desire to connect with another human being, not as a business transaction or social obligation, but as simply one person caring about another. As he finally stood up to head home, Marcus realized that the young woman who had offered him a hug had no idea that she had just embraced one of the wealthiest men in the world. More importantly, he realized that it wouldn't have mattered to her if she had known. Sarah Chun had seen him not as a billionaire or a business mogul, but as a lonely human being in need of compassion. That simple act of kindness was about to change everything.